for braving the rain and coming today to our annual faculty retreat. My stupid joke of the day is that it's raining because I put floods first in the title of today's program. And so I wanted to show, yes, we can flood. Anyway, hi, I'm Laura Watt, if you don't know me already, chair of the faculty this year. And it's funny, last fall when Laurel was starting, as she always does, to bug me about, don't forget, you have to organize a faculty retreat this year. I was trying to think of what to do, and various folks were suggesting, hey, how about GE rubrics or, other assessment criteria? I was like, no one will come. Everyone's tired this year. We had a crazy fall semester, as we seem to have now almost every semester, and almost every fall, I should say. And I wanted to come up with something that would be more of a conversation starter than a nose to the grindstone work day. And this is a topic that, obviously, I'm an environmental social scientist. I study stuff like climate change a lot. But the genesis of today's program really started with a guest talk that Mike Nuland, our first speaker, came and gave in a class Margie and I were teaching together last spring on cultural landscapes, and he came and talked about landscape context for climate change and stuff that we needed to be thinking about. And even though he was talking about stuff I knew already in an intellectual sense, there was something about the way he brought a lot of stuff together that really resonated for me, and especially when we had the various shutdowns last fall and the Kincaid fire, I thought more people need to hear this, and we really need to start talking not only about the topic of climate change itself, but really about what are we doing as an institution to prepare for these new kinds of changes that are coming, that are not just coming, they're here, that we're having to deal with. And instead of every fall running into, oh my gosh, another shutdown, another emergency, what do we do this time? How can we try to plan out and think more proactively about how to prepare our syllabi, prepare the way we talk with our students about expectations in the classroom? How do we deal with the fact that we've moved so much of teaching onto our LMS and then the power goes out? That's a problem. So just really trying to think creatively and proactively about how to better bolster our institution as well as our individual classrooms for potential interruptions coming along. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking today. Again, thank you for coming. We have two guest speakers this morning who I'm so thankful for braving the rain, particularly Andrea, who had to drive from San Francisco, and it sounds like it was quite an exciting ride. First we'll hear from Mike Nuland, then Andrea, and then we'll have a student panel. I really wanted to hear from the students just sort of what their experience of all the interruptions and shutdowns have been. Because I think sometimes we think we know, but we're not really sure we know. And of course, students across the campus also are experiencing things differently. And then between 11:30 and noon and 12:30, we just have an hour that Melinda and I have left kind of open. It's not just sort of free-for-all, but we'll kind of decide what we want to do when we get there, because I have the feeling that the talks today and the student panel will generate some ideas or some concerns that maybe will drive how we want to use that time. So we'll sort of regroup at that point. Huge thanks to my Vice Chair, Melinda Milligan, who just made it in time with her commute from San Francisco. And also, of course, Laurel Holmstrom, who is the energy force behind these retreats every year. She's the one who organizes everything and keeps me on top of stuff and everything else. And also to our AV team, who is recording these talks, because we knew there's a lot of people who can't make it, and we wanted to make sure this really does become more of a conversation across campus that hopefully goes forward and continues. So we are videotaping both of the guest speakers today. Because of that, and because the microphones are apparently extraordinarily sensitive, please stay quiet during the talks. Like, try to minimize your whispering to your neighbor, because apparently it will pick up everything. And then also, the only other thing I want to mention now is know that I have been informed that all of the plates and cups and utensils are made with compostable materials, so you can compost everything. Hooray. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mike Nuland, who's our first speaker today. Mike has become a good friend in the last few years. He's an alum of our CRM program here at Sonoma State from 2000. He worked for many years, for 15 years, as a senior staff archaeologist at the Anthropological Studies Center, the ASC, right over there, and now is Director of Cultural Resources for all of Northern California for Environmental Science Associates, yes. Consulting firm that is extremely well respected. I worked in environmental consulting myself before I came here. ESA was the organization I actually wanted to work for. So I'm jealous. Don't. He's also the former president of the Society for California Archaeology. He co-chairs their Climate Change Committee still. And I really wanted to mention, most recently he's been principal partner with a team of archaeologists and human remains recovery dogs that have been helping families recover cremains after the catastrophic fires in Northern California recently. I think he'll probably explain more about what that entails, so I'll leave that to him. But he, because of this work, he's won the 2019 North Bay Community Philanthropy Award and will be recognized this year at the SCA's President Award. It's really amazing work, and he will tell you more about it. He's also a regular on KQED's Perspective series, so if you want to read some of what he's written, that's there. And please welcome Mike Nuland.
Start. Let's see, I'm gonna fuss with this a little bit so that I can see this.
Would you need a man of white?
Well, I have a little sprinkler here, I think, but I want to be able to see the sides a little bit. Look for it. Jesus. Here, order. Oh, okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for having me today. It's good to be back on campus. I promise I'm not moving back in. I enjoyed my time here at Sonoma State immensely, and despite my best efforts, I learned a lot. This one. So, I'm missing something. Okay, I think we're good. I'm going to be showing pictures of fires here in just a little bit. I can see it a little bit. And if there are those folks here in the audience who are going to get a little triggered by that, I totally understand, and you should feel free to excuse yourself. It's just 3 or 4 slides, but having worked with survivors of the fires, I know that can be a pretty intense situation. The first part of my presentation is going to be utterly depressing, and then we're going to bounce back out of that. I'm going to dig into climate change just a little bit, but I'm going to go deep. And if you are not ready to get into like serious climate change discussions, I think I'm pretty good with this audience. But there's kind of no going back once you start peeling back the layers of the onion. So let's just keep that in mind as we go forward. And again, if you're not really ready to get into climate change, I will step out for the first half of the presentation. I don't normally start off my presentations with encouraging people to leave it, but I think it's fair to do that. So I'm an archaeologist by training, and I'm going to be driving a little bit outside my lane today. I hope that's okay. This is sort of a culmination of a number of projects I've been working on that have all sort of coalesced together. I want to start off with some material from the Ipcc special report that came out in the fall of 2018. So you who are listening to Greta talk about it, she was really raised to learn. One of the things I want to say about climate change projections is I don't think really they change all that much from year to year. What changes is the language that we use to talk about it. Our language gets more and more urgent, even though these models have existed for a long time. And those of us who work in the climate change community are always wrestling with how to say what we want to say so that people will listen. And we're not there yet, but we're getting closer. So let's go ahead and start off with some of these quotes. So what is the effect of 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase by 20 versus a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase? And this is by 2050 that they're talking about here. So there's substantial global differences. It doesn't seem like much, but that half a degree actually makes a huge difference. And what is the result of that temperature increase going to be? So species projected to lose over half their climatically determined geographic territory. It's about 18% of insects, 16% of plants, and 8% of vertebrates. Now, that's a lot. We're not going to move those plants and insects and animals. What this is saying nicely is that 18% of that geographic territory, everything in that, is going to die. Really, is what they're trying to say. They don't want to say that yet, but they're starting to hear more and more of that kind of language come out in the news. Coral reefs are projected to decline by 70 to 90% at 1.5, and larger losses at over 99%. So maybe most of us, hopefully most of us, are going to see coral reefs probably go extinct in our lifetime, unless there are some substantial changes or our understanding of science isn't complete, which we can always hope for. But I think we should keep these kinds of things in mind. This is why everybody's freaking out, these kinds of numbers. So what are we doing about that? It's here. What do we need to do to keep climate change 1.5 to 2 versus 2 degrees? So CO2 emissions must decline by 45% by 2030, and they have to be basically zero by 2070. Excuse me, that's just for the 2 degrees. They have to be at 0 by 2050. So that means no more gas stoves, no more gas water heaters, no more gasoline cars, no more heavy equipment, gas-run heavy equipment, unless we are offsetting it at such a rate that we can keep up. It's a really, really tall order. And when you hear in the news, people say, well, we're not doing enough, and the Kyoto Protocol is not sufficient to get us where we need to go. It's because those numbers are where we need to go. And it's huge. And I think it's important for us to take a minute to say, we are asking our species a lot to do this. And we need to have a conversation as adults about this. Because we have not been having conversations as adults. We've been having a conversation as teenagers who have not wanted to do something that we really didn't want to do, but we got to do it. And our kids are looking at us right now, waiting for us to do something about it. And actually, most of them are not waiting for us because they get it, even if we don't. So, what are we going to do about this? These are the projections for fossil fuel, coal consumption, and net exports, between now and 2050. This is material I pulled, actually, this is just from last year, but this is from the federal government. As you can see, they're planning to do nothing about that. Now, I think part of this is a function of the administration that we have right now and what they want to talk about in terms of projections. But this is sort of that wall that we're running up against, is that there's a big chunk of folks that really absolutely do not want to do anything about this. And this is the crude oil production that they're planning to do between now and 2050. Not a thing. We have to be aware that that is the context that we're working in from a federal government standpoint. It's going to take a lot to change the federal government. The kinds of actions that we should be doing right now should be dependent on the federal government to take action for us. There's other things that we need to get busy with while we work on these issues. So I want to talk about some of the impacts of this and look at some sea level rise projections. So what are the current sea level rise scenarios? This is from the 2019 climate assessment from California, which I like because they are, I think, a little bit more honest about what some of these climate scenarios might be. And it might be a little hard to see here, but I want you to take a look at the far right hand set of scenarios there. And you'll see that 8 feet is the tallest scenario that they're considering for 2100, which I find is really interesting because when I started this work in 2012, 5 feet was the highest that they were willing to consider. I've also found it interesting that when we had the federal government shutdown, the last round, last winter, the NOAA has a sea level rise projection model, which is really interesting. I encourage you to check it out. You can get right down into practically in your backyard and see where the sea level rise is going to be. And when they went offline, they had a six foot sea level rise projection model. When they came back, they had a 10-foot sea level rise projection model. So those guys internally made good use of that time when they were shut down. I thought that was great. And you can see here actually, okay, so that's that worst case scenario that we've got there. And then that red arrow is a placeholder that the state has put in for, hey, maybe we should start thinking about a 10-foot sea level rise. That's what that little X is. And so I think over the next couple of years, you're going to hear more about it. When you read in the news, it's going to say, oh my God, we're expecting a 10-foot sea level rise now. Things have changed, the models have been totally wrong. Well, no, people are anticipating it now. They're not wanting to talk about it as much, but they're anticipating it. Okay. So what does this sort of thing look like? Actually, let me stop here for a quick second. So I wanted to throw this in here. So this is this is CO2. This is not per capita. We'll talk about per capita in a little bit. But this is CO2 production by state. And you can see that California is second in the nation for CO2 production, which I think came as a surprise to me, which is why I threw it in here. Because here I am. I'm a committed Californian, and I think we were working with solar energy and all these renewable energy projects and electric vehicles are so big here, but we're still second in the nation. So the nation has a right to look to us for guidance because we are actually one of the problems. So this is some stuff that I worked on with Tom Whitley here on campus. He is a genius with these GIS models, and so he and I got some cahoots here and trying to see what this would look like. So this is San Rafael. And this is an 8-foot sea level rise. Okay. Now, what's harder to tell in this picture is that he also actually did a change in the veg model that would reflect those kinds of percentage losses of vegetation species that we talked about earlier. And so you'll see that basically the flatlands of San Rafael get flooded out at exactly the same time that the hills turn into a tinderbox. So you're going to be shoving people out of the flat areas and up into the hills for housing and for development, really at a time when those hills are the most susceptible to fire. That's the Bay Area with a 10-foot sea level rise. There's Long Beach. That's Fort Lauderdale. Now, I used to be, God, Florida, you got to be on it, man. You guys got a lot of problems. You need to get out in front of this. And I look at that and go, you know what? Go and drink your mojito, sit on the beach, enjoy your condo, because it's going to go. There's really, the scale of that is so huge that you really can't, Florida certainly doesn't have the funding to get fed. The feds really don't show any inclination of getting up in front of this right now. So I think you keep hearing this term managed retreat. It's really underway. I actually I've already put some of my first proposals together for managed retreat projects. They're already ongoing, whether the general public is aware of it or not. So that's a big deal. And as an archaeologist, this climate shift thing is something we've been really interested in for a long time. In fact, it's been sort of been in our wheelhouse, even though we have not really engaged publicly with it very much as we should have. Part of the reason why I give these kinds of talks is to start pushing archaeology into some of these discussions. Because we've gone into a couple of big climate shifts before in California. One was the medieval climatic anomaly, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. And the other one is the Middle Holocene altithermal, which I will also touch on here. But so if you look at these gray blocks here, that represents time periods of occupation of village sites in San Francisco. And as you can see, all of them but one crap out about 800 to 1000 AD or so. And that's a function of the medieval climatic anomaly, which is a drier, warmer time period of severe droughts that lasted for several centuries. And what we see is spikes in violence, and in starvation, and in food-related diseases during this time. This is from a data set of like 17,000 skeletal remains. It's a big data set. These are tribal groups and cultures. I mean, these guys they're not, they're entirely different groups of people who speak different languages and have different religious systems, who got along peacefully, relatively until this time period of high stress. It's something for us to be thinking about as we move forward. And this is actually very similar numbers for all of the Central Valley. So you're talking many languages, many cultures, religious systems. It doesn't really matter what their base culture looks like. They head to this trajectory. So that's something that I would encourage us to be thinking about. But that's actually really not the worrisome time for me so much, because we're already well on our way to that. The big one I'm worried about is the medieval altithermal, which for us in California was devastating. That was a 2 degrees Celsius temperature shift. And this is what we're looking at, within the next 30, 40 years. What we have in California is places of California that simply become abandoned, particularly the desert areas. People just disappear off the landscape. They disappear throughout much of the Central Valley. Where we find them is in deeply buried sites. And they're deeply buried because the hill slopes and the Sierras collapsed and slid down due to fire and landslide and severe storms and covered their villages out and capped them. What we see in a lot of places is soil degradation, erosion, to essentially the point where the soil dies. We know this because all the artifacts that are on top of the village site deflate down into lower villages, and all the artifacts get mingled together. There's only a couple ways that can happen with all that stuff still sitting in place. It's because your topsoil died on you, and the stuff drops down in place. So as you can see here, this is a little tough to read. This is from the Ipcc as well. We're in the top, I think we're looking really right now kind of at the top right hand. And you can see the best case scenario by 2100 is a 2 degrees Celsius temperature shift. That's the best case.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Speak up? Oh, sorry. What are you doing sitting way in the back? You guys are teachers. Why is everybody, look at this right now. Everybody's in the back row. Yes, I will try to speak up. I'm sorry. So I thought it was interesting because there's some really good work that's been done in the Clear Lake vicinity. And I was looking through some of the records and talking to Greg White, who also used to be here on campus a long time ago. And he's a genius, and who'd done the work on those sites. And I said, I was talking to him about this middle Holocene effect on their sites there. And he said, well, those sites around Clear Lake, they probably look like the area that you were doing, that you were doing a lot of work in, which was Joshua Tree at the time. So that desert scenario is probably what a lot of the Central Valley, Clear Lake, the North Coast ranges might have looked like. Which is ironic because, like I said, I do a lot of work in Joshua Tree. And Joshua Tree right now is planning on losing 90% of their Joshua Tree forests by 2100. So it's a big deal. So temperature shift, it's been much hotter. We're already starting to see a lot of that globally. And in fact, the temperature shifts happen faster than I thought they would. And I've been preparing this whole time for sea level rise and damaged archaeological sites. That's where I sort of hung my hat. And that's actually not where the action is right now. It's fires. And fire is here. It's the new normal. As Laura mentioned, I've been working with a team of human remains recovery dogs. These guys are the real deal. They worked at 9/11. They worked at the Oklahoma City bombing. And a team of archaeologists to go into a house that's been burnt down to find cremains. So these are people that were cremated before the house burnt down, were stored in an urn or a bag, and going through the ashes to find the ashes. And you can do it, surprisingly. And we can, I don't want to get too far afield on that, but we can discuss it more later if you like. So this is Tubbs Fire. So I've worked 4 catastrophic fires in the last 3 years. We've recovered over 200 sets of remains from those fires. So it's a new field for us, really. This is a whole brand new thing. We're making this up as we go along and taking notes as fast as we can. We've got people coming out reporting and documenting the work that we're doing. It is hard work working with the families. They are in a state of trauma. There's times where they cannot come out to the site because they just physically cannot bring themselves to be there. So in situations like that, we have what you see here, which is we'll put them on FaceTime, and they'll walk us through the site on FaceTime to help find ashes. This woman is looking for her brother, ashes of her brother in her house. And you can see she's very upset. It is emotionally taxing work. It's not something I ever thought I would do as an archaeologist. So it's a new learning thing for us. And we bring a sort of a unique skill set to this, not just because we're able to distinguish ashes, and we're used to looking at texture and soil and remains. And I'm very comfortable going into a destroyed house. We also know quite a bit, more than we should probably, about the minutiae of household items. And so there was one site that I worked on where like the previous slide, I had to work FaceTime with a woman who could not be on the site. And she was describing where she was keeping the ashes of her baby daughter, which was in a hope chest. And I knew what the hinges and fragments and stuff of the hope chest was like. The hope chest was gone. And so this is actually the clasp to that hope chest. And we were able to recover the ashes, which, from a baby is not a lot of ashes. So this was a unique skill set that we bring to this unique problem. It's thinking outside the box for this. There's no box anymore, guys. We're all in the same field right now, and that is figuring out what to do about climate change. One way or the other, we're involved in this. So I was out there at the campfire, and there was a fellow there, a director from National Geographic, and he was checking it out and talking to survivors. And his normal beat was war zones. And he was looking around and he said, there's only one time that I see destruction this bad, and that's genocide. Where you not only have people removed, they destroy their homes, they destroy their crops, their vegetation, their infrastructure, their everything. Houses, electrical lines, businesses, they're all gone. And that really struck me because in some ways that's really what we're doing, right? This is a passive genocide of the affluent countries versus the countries that cannot prepare for this and are susceptible to climate shifts. It's a really important thing for us to wrap our heads around, that by not acting, we've made a choice here and we're throwing everybody else under the bus. And it's not just us. And we can look at numbers, and you'll see that China and India are right up there with us as gross global polluters. I feel this is as much a economic genocide as it would be a cultural one. So now that we hit rock bottom, here we are. These are my daughters. Actually, they're trying to get some ice cream on me here, but it's not good, right? And it's a very grim situation that we find ourselves in. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. We could talk about more grim scenarios and that sort of thing later on if you want. But what I do want to touch on is that we live in a world where we've got really horrible things happening and really horrible actors doing horrible things. And the world is also luminous and beautiful and stunning, and people are wonderful, they're generous, and they're giving, and they're doing, and they're taking action. And if you are one of those people like me, who vastly, oh my God, what's tough? Oh, that's great. Oh, this, both are true, and it's okay that both are true. We have, and we're going to be making these transitions from one minute to the next. Your students are wrestling with this, I'm sure, right now. Are people good? Are people bad? Things, both situations can coexist. We're sort of Schrodinger's civilization. And so I want to kind of touch on that for a couple seconds. Drops in extreme poverty. I lifted a couple of these slides off the New York Times article from Sunday. I don't know if any of you saw it, that this is actually, the title of the article was, "This is the best year we've ever had," which I thought was really interesting. And it was a guy who was normally a pessimist and has a lot of grim things to say, but he brought a lot of this stuff up. And so you can see here, drops in extreme poverty have plummeted over the last couple of decades. This is a big deal. This isn't just American poverty or European poverty or African poverty. This is global poverty. Us as a species working together to try to wrap our heads around this problem and solve it. Drops in child mortality. I mean, that's a big drop. That's only 20 years. Increase in global literacy since the 1800s, which for an archaeologist is like no time at all. This is like happened overnight. From our perspective, that's amazing. And that's not just a government or a group of people. That's all of us deciding as a species that this is where we want to go. So while at the same time we have all this dramatic stuff going on, it's horrible and awful, we also have these huge strides on things that we probably didn't think we would ever be able to make huge strides on. And we're doing it at a very quick pace. So the question isn't are we going to adapt to climate change, are we going to be resilient? We are. We're working towards it right now. The question is, are we going to do it faster? And that's kind of where I want us to sort of proceed forward. CO2 emissions. Despite the numbers that we're getting about coal and oil production, CO2 emissions have actually been dropping. We're doing it whether or not the federal government's doing it or not. The states, the local people, our consumer choices, business choices. I got two. Oh, that's California. So California has also dropped. We've kind of leveled off there. I think that's probably going to be a function of some of this is going to be obviously a function of our economic recovery. But it's not spiking back up. It's plateauing. So I have high hopes there. And this is our per capita. We were talking about that earlier. So actually, as individuals, we have a very low CO2 footprint, a carbon footprint. Our problems are more a function of the sheer number of people we have. We're going to have to come up with more interesting solutions to our problems than trying to pin individual people down and say, I mean, we all do need to convert over to electric cars, but there's other structural things we need to put in play. And so green energy progress. I can do 50 of these slides of solar. So worldwide capacity, 20 GW by 2010, and the reality is by 2018 we've exceeded that by 20. Factor of 20. And the solar is has similar kinds of numbers, and we can look at all sorts of things. We can dig into water quality, and I mean there's lots of good news out there. I always think of good news as bad news that hasn't realized yet. And so, but this is good news. I mean, we are on a good track going forward. All of us collectively are working together towards this common goal, and it's good. We should be proud of that. We should support it. So I want to switch hats for a quick second and jump into archaeology, kind of the main point of the talk here. So I work best with the TOLA, which is a group up in northwestern California. They're at Crescent City region. And I was doing a project where I was talking with elders and looking through old ethnographic records to look at how have your resources changed, electoral resources changed in the past 50 or 60 years as seen by the eyes of elders. And so we talked about fish and plants. It was, as you can imagine, it's a fascinating topic. The knowledge of the elders is incredible. And one of the things I started to wrap my head around was smell, which is this little fish, about that big, from an anchovy-looking little guy. And smell are hugely important to the Tola. And much of their culture is built around harvesting these smell. And they're out there still collecting every June. They all rush out to the beach, drop it to Nuland, and they go, families, everybody, grandparents, and they go catch smell out of the shore. And the women prepare the baskets, and there's a whole, the beach has got to be the right consistency, the grasses have got to be there and everything. So they just fish up to dry and bring them back. And so, as I was talking to them, everything sort of seemed to circle back around this mountain and how complicated it was. And so I decided, you know what, I just need to weigh all this up. I want to see where this is all connected. What do you need to actually catch one of these little fish? Well, it turns out you need all this. It's a huge system of stuff. You need the sand has to be the right particle size in order for the smelt beds to be there. You need shorebirds to show you where they are offshore. Even though the shorebirds physically don't have anything else to do with them, you need them. When the rosebud blooms, that's when it's smelt season. That's when it's time to drop what you're doing to get to the beach, right? And then you need basketry and fishing equipment, and then you have to trade for all of that to get a bunch of that stuff. You need willow. At the center of this whole thing, the driver of this web is ceremony. Ceremony governs everything. You do ceremony when you collect the willow, when you go collect the smelt, when you get everybody together to trade materials back and forth. Ceremony sits at the center of the total world view, as it does for probably most traditional tribes. Laura and I were talking about the Kalia earlier, which is where I originally got this idea, and this is definitely the case with the Southern California desert tribes, who absolutely have to be in certain places at certain time to catch certain resources, or they don't make it. And the ceremony helps reinforce that whole system. It's a driver. So I was giving this presentation in Marin County a few years ago, a version of this, an early version. And I was getting ready, I was like, okay, I'm going to bring the slides down. And they said, oh, you know, it's outside. There's no projector. And I'm like, oh, I'm so screwed. I'm going to show this, right? So what I did is I got a couple of Caltrans roadside stands. I didn't steal them, I promise. And I ran a chain around them. And then I ran bungee cords and silver rings with labels on them with all these different things. And I built that web for folks. Okay, you need this, you need this, and you stretch it all out. And then I was able to show them, if you take out one of these rings, you pull on it, it pulls the whole system, including things you didn't even think were connected to it. And when I was done with that, I was, dismantling this mess. I thought, what would it look like for buying an apple? Right? I'm curious, what would a web like this look like for us? Because I never really had thought about it. But here we have our apple. Well, this is what you need to get an apple, right? You need unionized and non-unionized labor. You need your grocery stores. You need the FDA. You need trucking companies. You need fertilizers. You need all these things. So what sits in the middle of our web as the driver? Well, it's really two things. It's money. And it's fossil fuel. Fossil fuel and money sit in our economy where ceremony sits in our traditional economy. We have to ask ourselves, is that what we want? Is that what we want in the center of our driver? And you may say, well, fossil fuel and money, those are just tools, right? Well, here is the governor of Oklahoma declaring Joyful Prayer Day a few years ago, right? You guys have probably seen regularly in the news the ties between certain evangelical groups, not all evangelical groups, but certain evangelical groups, with fossil fuel and climate change denial. It's a faith-based argument that we need to keep going with the fossil fuel. The science is pretty clear that the fossil fuel is not the way we need to go. There's an effort underway to mush uncomfortably some aspects of religion and some aspects of our fossil fuel use. And that is not something you can have a logical argument against. There's other things going on. And there's a kind of a cheap shot that we trust for money. But look at all of these prosperity gospel books that are out right now, trying to wed money and religious faith. And that's, we can have a whole conversation today, right, about the ties between money and religion going back beyond. And I don't want to take a top down where we have, these are bad characters who are trying to take advantage of these folks. There's certainly those people out there, right? It looks like I can test that out. Okay. There's certainly those people out there who are doing that sort of thing. But I want to talk about why we as a people, as a species, as a culture, why we need to have that I don't want to say why we need it. We have this desire to have something bigger in the center. And we have these things in our center right now which don't go well with that. And we are suffering because of it. If you think about like salmon or smelt or corn, some of these central key economic drivers in other cultures, I mean, they're everywhere, right? They're in their gods, they're in their stories, they're in their artistic motifs, everywhere. We want to do that, but we know it's wrong. And we haven't figured out how to dig ourselves out of that hole yet. And we're going to have to, because one of the things I find really fascinating about working with the tribes is how they've recovered. How, when basically straight up white people went in and tore these webs apart, and they had to go back through and rebuild them. Many tribes are doing this quite successfully, and they've got cultural issues and everything else that we can get into. But they're having to rebuild their webs, and it's very important for us to watch how they do this and what works and what doesn't, because we actually have to do that to ourselves, which is one of the great ironies. This is really complicated. It requires people who are capable of taking big, complicated problems, picking them apart into their component pieces, and solving them. That is you. You guys are the brain trust for this. And it's not about what your areas of specialty are. It's the skill sets that you all have in taking on very large, complex problems and chewing your way through them. We need you more than we've ever needed a highly educated, highly intelligent group of folks ever before in our history. You have a key role to play in this. And I strongly encourage you, if you are sitting it out, don't, because we need you now. You can't. You saw what the feds are going to do. They're not. That's us. And so I wanted to close on this. This is, again, my two girls here giving me the evil eye. I wanted to say a couple things about children with this, and particularly millennials, Gen Z. I don't even know where these guys fall, Gen Z. They're not going to forgive us for not acting on this. And I can have a whole presentation on Gen X's culpability in this. And their culpability is apathy. We've known about all these problems. We've known about gun violence. We've known about climate change. We've known about environmental degradation for a couple of decades, and we've sat it out. And this is not to our credit. I want to encourage everybody to get up and start getting out in front of this. The second thing I want to say on this is I love millennials, and I love Gen Z. They're more engaged than my generation ever was. And they're aware of what's going on around the world. And I am so heartened to see them taking action in this vacuum that we've left them. They're coming through your classes, and they are learning from you guys about the world and how the world works in a way that their folks cannot teach them in a way that they've never seen before. There's one thing I want to end with on that is that both these generations are generations that have been raised on video games. They are professional problem solvers. And the games get harder and harder and harder because they get better and better and better at solving them. At some point, these guys are going to find the stock market. Right? And for those of us like me who are in the stock market pretty regularly, gambling around, it's a very easy way to make a lot of quick money. And these guys are going to be professionals at it. And they need to know what to be able to do with that, what their life goals are. It cannot be fossil fuel and money. They can learn a lot of that about how to fix things from you. And that is another crucial role that you can play, is getting them ready, because they are being primed to take this on for us. And it's great, and they want to. And I want to encourage us all to be there, to help them go forward, to show them how to do it, and then give them the tools to do it. I think with that, I will close. Thank you.
We do have time for some questions or comments, if anyone has something to say at this point or to ask. conversation.
Hi, so my name is Barbara Billiken. I represent Sonoma State in a local Sonoma County board. It's the transportation.
Yeah.
We just recently had a board meeting. It was my first time there, and I was listening to their conversation because they were trying to develop a vision for what they're going to be doing with the roads and bicycles and everything else. And as I was listening to that, it became very clear to me that when I looked around the room, there were no young people.
Yes.
So that was one of the points that I brought up to them, and that's something that as us as an institution and when we're going out into the community, if we can encourage our students to attend these meetings and become vocal, that would be important. One of the other points that I brought up to them was that they're not thinking like this generation thinks. I have a 21-year-old, so it's easy for me to make my own personal reference, which is they don't want to leave the house. They don't want to drive cars. They really don't want to drive cars. It took forever. My child would rather have a cell phone than a car, right? And then the third thing was, they're talking about transportation, and one of the modes of work is telecommute. And so my suggestion to them was to engage businesses in incentives to try to monetize telecommuting as a way of cutting back on the carbon output.
No, I think that's really great, and I'm so glad you mentioned all those things, because that brought up a couple of things I meant to put in this presentation and forgot. So let me touch on it. One is, so I gave a talk at the Environmental Forum in Marin about 2 months ago, and they discussed a project. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of this, but they discussed a project that 2 of their students that came through their program did, which was go around and chat with the different groups focused on environmental, nonprofit groups focused on environmental issues. Then they went and strategically hit every municipality in Marin County, all the city and county government offices, and convinced them all to convert over to renewable energy, 100%. The entirety of renewable energy. These 2 students are responsible for converting the entire county over to renewable energy. And they did it by strategically striking these meetings when there was budgets, and they were doing their budget votes. They asked, they put a strategy together, and they went out and hit it. That's good stuff, right? The second thing I want to talk about on that point is that there is a fatal flaw in the thinking of the people that want to perpetuate our oil and fossil fuel use. And that is that none of them can think past themselves. That is a real weak spot. They can't plan out past 20 years. They don't know what's going to happen. We can. And I want us to encourage us to think that this is us bringing, them bringing oil to a brain fight. And we've actually got more ammo there, I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Any other questions? I know it's early.
I guess I have a direct question. And how do those faculty have addressed some of these concerns that you have? Directly what we do, right? Besides, I think one example we gave was serving as a model, right? We're energy conscientious. How do you see that play out in our day-to-day interactions or, weekly interactions with our students? What are the possible solutions that you see us implementing?
Right. I think how I would best suggest that is pick a problem and start hammering away at it. And it could be watershed restoration. It could be getting solar panels and chargers here on campus. It could be trying to work with the city government on addressing the homeless issue that we've got off of Highway 12 there in the Parkway. I mean, the number of problems that are out there, and it's kind of twofold. The answer is twofold. One is you have a skill set of picking apart these big problems, please find a big problem and start working on it. And it may not, that part of it may not be something that's directly applicable to what you're teaching your students. But the other part of it is, as your students are looking at projects that they can take on, there's a lot of meaningful work that can happen out there, working for nonprofits, working for local governments, working for local federal agencies, to try to get out at any number of these issues that are coming up. It could be habitat restoration and doing counting of different plant species. Each agency has a laundry list. I'm a big fan of internships. Really encourage them to reach out and get internships with organizations that are trying to solve these problems. I think that particularly the nonprofit community could really use a lot of help, a lot of young people help. I would really encourage us to engage in that. So we could sit down and probably put out a roadmap of different things that different people could do based on their skill set. But I want folks to get away from your area of specialty and that knowledge that you have and focus more on your abilities as professional problem solvers.
In our general ed classes, we've been asked to develop like a signature assignment that helps pull things together and demonstrate that the students are getting what we're hoping out of the class. And it's often quite integrative. And I took up a few years ago a shift in that final project where I'm getting my students to do two things. Imagine a post-fossil fuel society, and they're thriving. The rule is they cannot do a dystopia.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a big thing, right? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You are 100 or 200 years past the conversion to a post-fossil fuel society. I'm a linguistic anthropologist. I'm teaching them language. So what would their language look like? Right? And in order to have a language, you have to have a culture that uses it. So then you have to say, well, what's your family and kinship structure is going to be? What's your economy going to be? What's going to be the experience of living in this? And your comment about ceremony is helpful for me. And it's ironic that as an anthropologist, I haven't really been focusing on ceremony in this task. But I think I'm going to up it a little bit and try and see if I can nudge that in there. So I'm finding that's helpful. But I do think that you even said it yourself, we're going to see lots of negative stuff to open this, but then you're going to bounce with, look what's better. And I think if we can keep saying the solution means we're actually going to be happier than now, right? If we can keep that going, we can pull people in. Otherwise, that cognitive dissonance that's going to go on is just going to get worse because people can't handle it psychically.
But that is such a good point. And just out of show of hands, how many people consider themselves Gen X here? How many people are Gen X here? How many people will consider yourself Gen X here? A handful? All right. So these are people born in the late 60s, early 70s. So all you young people in the back, the reason why I asked that, as I was mulling this over the other day, is that with the possible exception of Star Trek, we grew up with no good future. There was no good representation of the future. It was either Escape from New York, or it was Mad Max, or it was zombie apocalypse, or you would go out in space, aliens waiting for us. You go in the ocean, Jaws is waiting for us. You go in the woods, Jason is waiting for us. There's no place for us to go, and no future. And I've seen some commentary by science fiction writers about this, saying we got to stop. We've missed a generation of where science fiction was laying out all sorts of interesting paths that we could take, and we've hit this wall of it's either all or nothing. It's either Disneyland's Future World, Tomorrowland, or it's Mad Max. That has not served us well. That we've gone decades without a good model. And even with Star Trek, when they introduced the Borg, they killed the good future. really, as a dramatic device. They took away everything good about Star Trek. I thought that it's a very, sorry to trek out on you guys for a little bit. But that was a really important decision on their part, because all of a sudden space became someplace you did not want to explore anymore. And that wasn't good for us.
Doing a low-tech version of getting us started again. I'm using my professor voice. It's great, it worked.
Thank you, everyone. We've been told to get very close to the mic, so I will try to do that. Thank you so much for being here this morning, especially with the rainy trek that many of you made to come to campus. My name is Nuland Milligan. I'm Vice Chair of the faculty, and I'm so excited to be able to tell you a little bit about our next speaker and to introduce her. One of the things that I've struggled with in thinking about our campus culture in response to the recent fall closures is watching my colleagues, my faculty colleagues, really struggle with how to respond to the sort of regular nature of the closures and the regularized nature of the crises and the trauma that we and our students have been going through the last few falls. And especially this fall, I was really struck by how my colleagues were really struggling between being compassionate and supportive and accommodating for our students, but yet at the same time, professionally, really feeling like where they could contribute was around academic integrity and standards, and how do we both accommodate and support our students while at the same time doing what we've been trained to do in terms of our professional disciplines. And so in thinking about managing ongoing trauma, ongoing crisis, I began talking with people on campus about where can we access someone who can talk with us about those issues, and how to think about crisis and trauma at an organizational level, at an institutional level, as well as an individual level. And one of my colleagues in sociology, Deborah Paterniti, recommended a co-author of hers that she said would be perfect. She said, Andrea is the person you want to talk to. She will really help us think through these issues. And so I'm so glad that it worked out that Dr. Andrea Sarah Tanta can join us today. So let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a professor of clinical psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, and she completed her psychiatry residency at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, followed by a geriatric psychiatry fellowship at UCLA, and that's her past. And at present, let me tell you a little bit about why she's especially salient for us today. Dr. Sarah Tanta has an interest in physician and training burnout and resilience and faculty development. And prior to joining UCSF, Dr. Sarah Tanta was at UC Davis, at the UC Davis Medical School, and there, as Associate Dean for Student Wellness, she developed and led the Student Wellness Program at the med school. And so that's really guided some of the things that she'll be able to talk with us about today. Professionally, I can tell you that she's a member of the Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society and a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and the Association for Academic Psychiatry. She's also the author or co-author of 85 articles and book chapters, and actively mentors students, residents, and faculty. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Tanta today.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Can people hear me? Closer to the mic. Closer to the mic. I'm a little bit under the weather, so sorry for ruining the recording with my cough. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I'm delighted and I'm honored to be here, and I'll give you the punchline. I don't know how we're going to get out of this situation, but I'm here to help you encourage and perhaps inspire you to start taking some steps towards healing. And I come here with a lot of respect for the suffering you and your students have been through, and with great humility. So hopefully with that disclaimer, we can start. I do want to acknowledge, thank you so much, Dr. Milligan, Dr. Watt, for inviting me, and my longtime friend, Paternity, who's not here. I was so delighted to hear from her, and I have to tell you, we're usually all so busy and booked about 3 months ahead in our clinics, and I'm here instead of being in my clinic today because they passed, and because the topic is very important. I have no conflicts of interest. I did have past support when I was at UC Davis. I was very grateful to receive support from SAMHSA that protected some of my time, helped me learn about resilience a little bit, the little bit I know. I'm here to learn together, and hopefully we'll get to this in a moment. And I also want to acknowledge that over the past 6 months, our department, and I'm happy to be one of the founding members of this Climate Change and Mental Health Task Force. Finally, we've gotten our act together, following our students, and decided that it was time for us to do something about it. I'll say on this a very quick personal disclaimer or a very quick personal point. The reason I am interested in climate change is because I have patients. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist. I have patients with Parkinson's disease. That's what I do. I treat people with movement disorders, people who can't move when they are anxious and terrified. So I have people who barely escaped the Santa Rosa fires in 2017, who were then again displaced in 2019 as we were starting to work on these topics. So, so scary, and people feeling so helpless and realizing that we're nowhere near to know what we should be doing about this. So on that note, I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about burnout amongst academic faculty. Everything I know comes from medical school faculty, but I looked a little bit in the literature to see what I can learn about non-medical school faculty. We're going to talk about individual resilience enhancing strategies, things you do for yourselves, and very simple things you may not think of that actually work and help. We're going to talk a little bit about institutional sustainable practices, and that's actually where hopefully you'll take that into the next steps, maybe into the breakout groups. And I do want to recommend, one resource, if you're reading about resilience, this book by Southwick and Charney on resilience, but there's so many others. This one happens to be the one that I found to be very helpful. Good so far? Good so far? Can people hear me? Good? And I'm not moving, I'm standing where I'm shooting. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to start with a reflective exercise. It will take just a few minutes. This is your values exercise. We have handouts that are going to be passed around. Thank you so much for your help. So on this side, Laurel is helping. Please only do the front page. I saved trees, hopefully doing front and back. So this is just the self-reflection exercise, number 1 on the front page. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment. This is just doing it by yourself, self-reflection. Think about your values. Think about what's important to you. We also have pens for those of us who want to write and don't have pens. So raise your hand if you need a pen or a pencil. Perfect. Thank you. I'm moving for a moment. So, perfect. This is hard, right? It's hard to come up with strengths. We're very good at coming up with weaknesses. I'm sure things to improve on. But the strengths are important because the strengths are part of the resilience. So if we're okay, people need more time? Good? Okay. So hold on to this. We're going to come back to it. This was the first part. Don't do the second part. Don't do the second part. There's more work to be done. We should talk about burnout a little bit, but just a little bit, because I'm not sure, as Michael said, it's all uncharted territory. I'm not sure this describes exactly what's happening, but it is actually what happens when people are under chronic stress, constant stress, day after day. It is work-related. This is not the same thing as depression, which is pervasive in all spheres of one's life, personal and work. This is work-related. Burnout is defined as a psychological syndrome of depersonalization, meaning we don't really feel human, or people we deal with don't really feel that they're as human, dehumanized, emotional exhaustion, and reduced personal effectiveness. Very important, because we feel ineffective when we're burnt out. And this is in response to chronic work stress, And in general, for people who deliver human services of any kind, teachers, doctors, EMS, firefighters, nurses, everyone else. As we talked about, this is important when we deal with daily stress. You may be having, you may be experiencing this. I'll give you the numbers on doctors, they're not very good. And there's actually all kinds of instruments. The best known instrument to measure this is the mass burnout inventory. So if anyone wants to do a study on faculty burnout, I'd recommend the MBIHS for human services. There are 3 subscales, and I'm just going to mention them real quick: the emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment. If you start looking at this literature, actually it doesn't look that good for physicians and physicians in training. It keeps going up every year. But for you, I was curious to see what does it look like for academic faculty, non-healthcare professionals. Some recent papers say that it's comparable to healthcare professionals, and that could be 60%. That usually describes us. So probably we're in territory of people experiencing chronic stress and all kinds of signs and symptoms that I'll talk to you about. I do want to emphasize this is not pathologic. This is not in our diagnostic manual for mental disorders. This is not a diagnosis that you have to see a mental health professional for. But this is something to recognize and try to take measures to increase the resilience to counter that. There are also recent studies that show that the teacher's emotional exhaustion, remember one of the subskills, is actually negatively correlated with the student's achievements. This is important because if the student's performance drops as a result of interruptions, school closures, they can't get their courses of the LPS, LSM, LMS, help me.
Learning management system.
Thank you.
LMS.
Yes, LMS. Because the power is shut down, right? And their performance drops, their academic performance drops, you may feel ineffective. So very important to pay attention that this is a result of environmental stressors. If you feel ineffective, it's very important. It's not you, it's what's going on around you. And I'm probably saying things that you already know, but it's important to name them and talk about this. For non-tenure track faculty, which I understand 70% of people in general are in non-tenure track, I'm in a non-tenure track, then there's no tenure track at UCSF. Maybe there is, but I just don't know about it. Don't let my chair see or my dean see this video, please. The commitment to current institution is negatively correlated with burnout. So the more you want to stay, the higher the burnout risk. That's what some people inference said. And then from medical school studies of students and faculty with burnout, actually there's lower professionalism scores. So there's all kinds of scales. You can measure the professionalism. Students cutting corners, reporting labs as done when they actually didn't have a chance to check. Perhaps cheating on tests. These are medical students. And people feeling that they're just overwhelmed, so they're trying to cut corners. Professionalism lapses. Very important to keep in mind. Good so far? Good? Okay. Long list of contributing factors. Once again, the important fact here is to see if this is happening. You should know that it's contributing to burnout, and perhaps there are ways you can mitigate this and try to modify this. And hopefully it's going to go back to the breakout groups and the leadership to try to affect some of this. Excessive workload, 60 to 80 hours a week. I can't remember when was the last time when I had 80 hours. It's way more than that, right, for many of us, probably you too, trying to compensate and put your courses on LMS and then trying to figure out how to put your courses in a different modality, maybe like all on paper, so people can get them, maybe duplicating work. Effort reward imbalance, there's actually theories that come from business on burnout, because burnout is prevalent, it's not just us. And that really means that the more effort you put and the less reward you get, that imbalance is actually contributing to burnout. And once again, the reward could be your students' scores or academic performance, and that may not be as good as you wanted, but then you keep going at it because that's what we know how to do. The same coping skills that usually help us in crisis, we're trying the same mechanisms, the same strategies, but they don't always work. They don't work when we are dealing with situations we're not prepared for. Dealing with emergencies we're not prepared for. We're not. No one is. Insufficient sleep, you probably know that. Lack of flexibility or control. You're told you're supposed to be on campus. When you can't get there, what do I know? For us, usually, it's being assigned to many nights on call when you have no control and you have family and other things to do. There are actually studies that show that women, or I should say, people who have family caregiving duties have higher risk of burnout. And then something I call misalignment, and there's some papers actually from surgeons. Surgeons, by the way, are very good at measuring burnout. I don't know how good they are at actually dealing with it. But misalignment means when you spend less than 20% of your time on your most meaningful activity. If your most meaningful activity is creating new curricula, for example, but you can't because you're supposed to, once again, duplicate your work or try to play catch up with students or offer more office hours, things like this, and you're not able to spend at least 20%. We think in percentages, we're paid by percentages, it's like 2% effort on this grant, whatever. So 20% is really, you're rich if you have 20% to give to something. We're good so far? Long list. Some applicable more so to non-medical school faculty, some maybe less. I do want to point out, I see this a lot in my colleagues, my students. We're so self-reliant. We are. Last person who will ask for help is any of you, right? True for us. Last person who will ask for help. You have to ask for help. You have to. These are, once again, unprecedented times. We don't know how to deal with this. This is when you come together in retreats like this and share what you've been through and talk to your colleagues and realize you're not alone. If you stay isolated and don't ask for help, there is even higher risk of burnout and feeling alone. So usually when we talk about burnout and things like this, it's important to look around and see what other people think, how other people feel. And maybe you've already done this, or maybe you've just been too overwhelmed and haven't had the chance. So once again, kudos to the organizers of the retreat for putting this thing on. Okay, there are signs of burnout, and if you take a moment, probably 10 seconds, and think, how do you react, or which one of those you recognize? The first one is cynicism. I call it, it really is so let's say personally, me thinking, oh gosh, I really hope that student doesn't come knock on my door right now, because I have so many notes to write from my clinic patients. And notice being a little bit tense or irritable when they step into my office. Maybe I should put the do not disturb sign on the door, you know. Cutting corners, we've talked about cutting corners. Maybe I don't need to return this phone call. Maybe I don't need to do this. Maybe they'll be okay, even if I, don't offer office hours. Irritability or mobility. And then by minor accidents, I really mean minor accidents. I don't know. Again, personal example, I drop things in the kitchen. When I start dropping things, I'm thinking I'm either too tired or it's time to take 2 days off. Then actually, you can do this. You can probably take 1 day off or a weekend without work email. You can do things for yourself. But you have to recognize it, right? People are laughing. Is that so unheard of, a weekend without email? Kind of hard. Okay, late. These are real examples from my colleagues thinking about retirement and checking their retirement funds. In her 50s, I should say, at the University of California, you can retire at some point, but not really then. Wishing that they would become seriously ill, or that something would happen on the way to work, like a terrible car accident on the freeway, and they wouldn't go into work that day. If this happens, you should recognize it. It's not a thought you have daily, right? You don't really start thinking about your retirement every day. Professional lapses, we talked about this. And then there's mental health consequences. This, we're talking more diagnosis. And people, you should see, you could. I shouldn't use the word should. You could. It would be advisable to seek professional help for this. Anxiety, depression, people use drugs, alcohol, and once again, I'm talking physicians, I'm talking university professors, and suicide penalty. And you probably know this, sometimes it's publicized. Physicians who complete suicide, and when you look back, they were terribly depressed and terribly burnt out. But so far, this is, I should say, like Michael said, this was the depressing part of my talk. Okay, and then something we came up with some time ago when we were studying this, the workload burnout, vicious cycle. The more work-related stress, or the more work you have, the more that can spill into the personal sphere and create homework conflict, right? You don't feel understood, you don't feel like, they're listening maybe. That creates more work because you're more irritable and upset that maybe things are falling behind, at work, which might create conflict at work. Your supervisor or your peer saying, you know what, you're not carrying your weight, which can actually contribute to burnout, and then it's a vicious cycle. The more burnt out we are, the more work-related stress and home stress we may experience. Okay, so on this note, we should take a deep breath, like really take a deep breath. Thank you. Thank you, and if that felt good, you can take another one. And start talking about resilience, so things we can do. So resilience is the ability to recover from illness or adversity. I would say, you're here today. You clearly are resilient. So are your students who are still here, still enrolled, still somehow managing, and I just learned that the academic performance didn't drop that much overall. So that's amazing. Kudos to all of you for your work, and to the students hanging in there, and their families and significant others who support them. So the ability to respond to stress in a healthy, adaptive way, that's resilience, adaptive, we're learning as we go. In a way such that personal goals are achieved at minimal psychological and physical cost. There will be cost, right? You have to put some energy into it. But the balance should come out a little bit positive on the reward side, on the resilience side. It is in a way the opposite of being burned out. Ron Epstein, actually Deb Paterniti is a collaborator. They co-authored papers together. Ron Epstein is a physician, a family medicine physician, who does a lot of research in physician resilience and resilience in general, and he came up with this wonderful, and if you want the reference, I'll give it to you. By the way, if you want any of the references, I'm happy to share with you. This is a recent book where he talks about if we're burnt out, once again, we feel ineffective, we're withdrawn, we're isolated, we hunker down, maybe you put a do not disturb sign on your office, or maybe you don't even have to drive in some days, right? And then the more you do that, the more isolated you are. But then on the other end of the spectrum, if we're resilient, we may feel present in the moment, mindful, paying attention to things, bouncing back from challenges. He used this very nice metaphor, bending but not breaking, optimistic, becoming stronger, and welcoming change, which I'll say that one is a tough one when we're talking about environmental changes because we have no control, but there's no other way to deal with it. So there's a lot of research on resilience, quite a bit. People have asked, is it innate? Is it a quality that you can't cultivate because that's it, you're born with it? Or is it learned? Actually, it's not just innate. And you know who does, anyone knows who does the most research probably, or maybe the best funded research on resilience? Anyone there to guess? Yes, the military. Yes, right. So a lot of programs, a lot of research. This comes from nursing, but people are more optimistic at baseline, have cognitive flexibility, can adapt to change. We'll talk a little bit about that. Internal locus of control means you feel you have control. External locus of control is I have no control over, let's say, my call schedule. My division chief makes that. Or I have no control over what classes I teach this semester. Someone else decides for me, whoever assigns that. Viewing obstacles as challenges, and you probably are familiar with Carol Dweck's work. She's a psychologist at Stanford, and she talks about the growth mindset. So believing you can adapt and you get better and better. And I so appreciate so many of the points you made, Michael. First of all, it is uncharted territory. We learn as we go, and we get better and better. and it is the generation of our kids and your students, I should say your students and your kids, who is going to get very good at this, hopefully. Lots of, I don't need to bore you with this, but there is lots of research. Actually, these are the same authors of the book I recommended from an article published in Science. Very good, very short article. They're talking about risk factors. We're not going to talk about depression. That's why I prefer to talk about burnout, because I don't want to pathologize this. Just to understand that anyone can encounter that, experience that. And then there's therapeutic interventions in the middle, things you can do to change from the left to the right. In this case, from the left to the right. And resilience, protective factors, things that some people have, they're innate, but also things you can do. Good so far? Okay, so there are strategies, some that we came up with, some that are published and well studied. I'm going to talk about individual and institutional. I did put professional associations there because that's what I like to talk about. I don't know what your professional associations are doing. I'll tell you that my professional association, the chapter, the APA and the local chapter, Northern California Psychiatric Society, had no clue. In October 2017, one of the first organizations I reached out to, and I said, how can I get trained in emergency preparedness? I have patients in this area. What can I do? And they took about a week to even reply to my email, mentioning the resources that I had figured out on my own by Googling. A person in New York actually responded to me before my San Francisco office for my professional association. Seriously, I hope this video doesn't go too far. Okay, but again, you recognize Ron Epstein and Krasner, very well known for mindfulness-based interventions for physicians and studying resilience. Okay, so I want to list some for you, but I also want to get to what you can do and what you have been doing in a moment. So it is very important to be aware in the moment. Just taking a deep breath, 1 or 2 deep breaths like you did at the beginning or somewhere in the middle of my talk, helps center you, allows you to clear your mind. Very quick exercise, if you want to go through it, is think about when you were driving in this morning. How many thoughts were going through your head? Tons, probably. There's not just a single thought. I was actually doing that myself as I was driving. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I had driven this when it wasn't raining, so I know where I'm supposed to be going. I wish I had done it with my husband, because I always feel safer. And then I thought, oh, it's going to be better when I return, because the rain will stop. That's great, because I still have to get back to my patient this afternoon. And then all that, right? There's not one single thought, million thoughts. You can learn to capture this by doing mindfulness practices. You can learn. Some of you are probably doing this. So meditation, mindfulness practices, spiritual practices for people who do that. Training in attention control. We say that the mind is like Velcro for negative events or negative feedback. People give you negative feedback, you remember it forever, but like Teflon for positive feedback or positive events. Learn to make it less Velcro for negative and more Teflon for positive. It will build your resilience. Very important. And you can learn this. These are cognitive strategies. They're actually mindfulness practices online. I looked them up and we have a handout. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which we're trained to do with cognitive reappraisal. Once again, the ability to cognitively reframe adverse events in a more positive light, and I should say in a more positive light, not in an entirely positive light. No one can. These are not positive events. These are terrible, terrible traumatic events, but you can learn to reframe them. So it's called cognitive reappraisal. And then enhancing self-efficacy, which is why I asked you to do your strengths and your walk-the-walk exercise. And then we'll get back to that. There's one more reason why I asked you to do that. We're good so far? Are we doing some of these strategies? We are, right? Of course, you wouldn't be here. Interesting studies with physicians, medical school faculty. A study in Germany. I should tell you on this note, the article is called, "If 1 in 5 physicians is burnt out, what about the other 4? And I looked at that, published in Academic Medicine, the best article. the best journal for us, and I looked at that and I thought, what do you mean 20% or 50% in the United States? So they must be doing something right. They do, they are. They derive job-related gratification. They did 200 semi-structured interviews, and this is what people said, faculty said, teaching interactions, or for us, being with our patients. Remember, your most meaningful activity, you have to spend at least 20%. If you're in, let's say, in an administrative position and you no longer get to teach and you want to teach, 20%, at least 20%, that's your alignment. Leisure time activities, relationships with significant others, with family, friends, and colleagues, keeping the personal and the professional boundaries. Remember what I said about email-free weekend or a day or an evening, maybe. Continued professional development, continuing to learn, and one of the reasons why we're all here, for me to learn from you all, and perhaps for you to learn together, focusing on the positive aspects. These were things they said. Southwick and Charlie add a lot of other things that are here on the list. They talk about loving family members and good role models growing up. This is going to contribute to innate, being optimistic and having more, expressing more positive emotion. History of mastering challenges. Your students, I bet you, have done that before they got here. Our students did. They're very resilient. We know that. Cognitive flexibility, we've talked about that. The locus of control, internal locus of control, things you can change. We talked about the ability to regulate emotions, so self-monitoring, just knowing where you are, taking a check, and then figuring out what you need to change. High coping, self-efficacy, strong social support. I don't need to read them all to you. I will point out that the last bullet point is important. Attention to health and cardiovascular fitness has been shown in studies, exercise, which is what I tell every single one of my patients. If you know anyone with Parkinson's disease, you know one of my patients, you know what? They can't move very well because of Parkinson's disease, but they move. These are the people who move. They know that exercise helps, and they are exercising better. I actually take a class, I'm in the back, obviously I'm not the best person there. My instructor has Parkinson's disease. The guy who teaches that class has Parkinson's disease. Hats off. Hats off to people around you who show resilience, and to all of you who know this resilience. You know it, you know how it affects you. On the learning climate, I just want to point out that we're not in isolation, right? It's you and the students and the staff and their families and everyone else around us, right? So what you do affects the students, what the students do affect you, what the staff complains to you about might affect you. So keeping in mind that no matter how much individual resilience strategies you have and you practice, you are going to be affected by everyone else around you. Which is why I want to make this very important point. Talking about resilience and just focusing on individual resilience and not the institutional response is, I should say, I'm going to say not that great. I don't want to use a negative word. It's not just you, right? You can do all these things. You can take as many classes as you want or do mindfulness practices. But there has to be a top-down response in addition to your grassroots and your faculty retreats and everything you're doing for your students. So this is very important. I don't want you to leave this retreat or my talk thinking that I'm just telling you to go exercise more or learn mindfulness practices. That's not going to work. It has to be all together. Good so far? So on that note, very important to invest in your own resilience and put on your oxygen mask first. Very important. Students come to you and you think, oh, I can see one more student, it's 7 o'clock, I should be home or I should be in my class. No, you know what I do? Seriously. Every time I think, oh, I'm too tired, I'm hungry, I have a headache, oh, I don't want to go to that exercise class, I think I do it for myself, I do it for my patients, and for everyone else who depends on me. And maybe that helps because you are faculty and staff here, and perhaps students, you're altruistic by definition, so just think you're doing it for someone else. It's going to help you stay motivated. It worked for me, kind of, I hope. I do want to put a plug in for mindfulness practices for those of us who don't know what these are. It's just what we talked about, the awareness in the present moment, paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally, which means trying to be kind to yourself and not use negative terms like I did. And one of my favorite books, but we can talk more about mindfulness if you want. So on this note, this is the interactive piece, Rosie. She's going to turn off the microphone so you can talk. So talk to each other. So turn to your neighbor and give an example of a personal one personal strategy that enhances your resilience. Something you're doing already, or maybe something you want to do. And do this pair exercise for a few minutes, and maybe I'll turn up with you. And I get when you can, not just in crisis. So this is what I was talking about, you know, that class, you think, oh, I'm going to do it. No, do it today. Taking time off or spending protecting time with your loved ones. Do it today. All of those things you are doing already, do them today, not when the next fires or floods or power shutoffs come. So you have one more exercise, and this is the second side of your handout I gave you. And please take a few moments to think, what do you think you are well prepared to handle? What can you handle? Don't make it too long. What do you need help with? And remember what I said, please ask for help. Don't think you can handle more than you want. Be honest. And then do you know the resources? And then how to tell the difference when the crisis comes. How can you tell the difference? Okay? So let's do this for a few minutes. I think this is going to be just the beginning of perhaps reflection on what you think you're equipped to deal with, what you may feel you need help with, and where to ask for help, and what your resources are, or what resources you need to put in place. You'll have time. And then how to tell the difference. That's, I think, most important. How to tell the difference. Maybe it's when you start dropping things in the kitchen. Or maybe it's when you say to yourself, oh, I should just put my do not disturb sign on the door. Or maybe it's when you don't want to go out with your family to see a movie because you don't have the time. You'll know. You'll be the best to know. So on that note, I want to talk just a little bit about institutional strategies. And I apologize, I'm going to go a little bit faster over the next 3 slides so we can stay on time. But very important. That's the first thing Melinda knows. I asked, so what's your employee assistance program look like? Took us a while to find it, actually, I think. I had to look online and go through 2 different links. But I found it and I put it on a handout that is going to be passed around at the end. And then I'm sure other people can answer that. Family-friendly policies and flexible work arrangements are important. So you can work from home, telecommute, somehow make this happen. Put all your energy into the things that are meaningful so you can be resilient. Of course, things like this, you know, talking about burnout and resilience, emergency preparedness plans, which I know you have, perhaps they can be changed. I'm pretty sure we have one at UCSF, but believe me, I have no idea where it is. It's in that manual that no one knows where it is. You get a safety training once a year and they ask you, do you know where it is? I know it's in the manual, but I have no idea where the manual is. And also if the power shuts off, can my badge actually work for me to go into the office? No, it won't. And then very important to talk to people who are more experienced than yourselves, mentoring and faculty development programs, as you know. I do want to spend just a few minutes to talk about leading under uncertainty and keeping in mind that every one of you is a leader, your students are. We're not talking about the official leaders with administrative roles, we're talking about every one of you. And keeping in mind what I said earlier, that we usually rely on the same coping skills, but they don't work when you deal with uncertainty. Deborah Ancona at the MIT Leadership Center talks about this leadership framework, and I'll just walk you through and stop on the one that I want to talk more about. So visioning, obviously, having a vision where you're supposed to go, relating, forming relationships, meaningful relationships with people. That you do all the time. Remember, the money in the piggy bank of your relationships as well. Inventing, innovating, and sense-making. And then they all talk about the change signature, which is how you deliver that to people, how you communicate that. And this is the adaptive leadership framework. So sense-making is the one quality I wanted to spend just 1 minute on. Really means creating a map, making sense of things that you don't know how to deal with, right? And doing that as learning as we go, as Michael said, and as I'm sure all of you have had to deal with those challenges. Seek many types and sources of data. Michael and I were just talking about, I want to invite him to UCSF, cognitive diversity. Talk to people outside your field. That's why I'm here also, to learn from you. Involve others. Always ask for feedback, right? You can't do that in isolation. And do not simply apply your existing frameworks because they don't work under conditions of uncertainty. And then, of course, try to not use bias and stereotypes, which we all have so many cognitive biases. Best book, actually, I've read on cognitive bias related to climate change, George Marshall. Don't even think about it. Learn from small experiments, see how they work. If they don't work, drop them, do something else. But once again, retreats, talk to each other, and then using effective ways to communicate your story. With that in mind, I'm going to leave you with this. You're creating the map. You have to make sense of what's going on. We all have to. I completely agree once again with Michael's points. And we don't know where this is going to take us. We don't know how we're going to solve the problem. We absolutely don't. But remember the exercise we did with the values? Your values are your compass. Your values will tell you where to go. So when in crisis, look inside, do the self-awareness, self-monitoring exercises we talked about, and remember your values and your strengths, and draw on those. That's the best advice I can give. With that in mind, this is perhaps a question for the breakout groups. I just want to leave you with this. What resources do you need? You're the best to know. If you need, I know, duplication of the LMS, thank you. And by when? Put a deadline. This is what we did with our climate change and mental health task force. We had a kickoff and we said, we're going to have a deadline. We met in October and we said, by October 10, 2020, because it's a deadline I can't remember, I came up with that, we are going to have all these deliverables in place. And you can do that. So I'll encourage you to think of what you need, what you think you have, what you don't need to be redundant on, and by when. And does that mean more committees? I say that with a grain of salt. Committees that actually do work, more resources. What do you need? You're the best to know. So in summary, unprecedented times and crises call for adaptive leadership. Our usual coping skills won't work. Your individual resilience building strategies go a long way, but they're not sufficient. And the strong institutional support is needed. And I'm going to say just one more thing. Please teach us all what you learned. Please disseminate the lessons learned. I'm here to collaborate. If anyone wants to work with any of us, my email address is on the handouts. And before I stop, I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Laurel for helping me today, for helping me get ready for this presentation. So I think we're good to stop, and we have time for a few questions. And we have another handout which we will pass around with some resources. I looked up Mindfulness Courses for you here in the area. I hope I got the area right because I'm not very familiar. And there's an online course as well. And then my top 10 resilience building strategies, which I'm sure you do all of them. Very simple self-care strategies that work for some people. I hope they work for you. Okay. Questions? Yes?
Thank you. You mentioned institutional support, and I know a lot of resilience comes from reframing how we approach problems and look at things, issues, challenges. But I'm wondering how we as an institution create a culture of fostering resilience rather than burnout.
Beautiful. Beautiful question. Did everyone hear the question? I guess yes, because the mic is sensitive. So how do we, you as an institution, foster resilience, change the culture? Culture change, in my opinion, is a combination of grassroots efforts and top-down initiatives. It will work if we all together, or you all together, work at this. It starts with very simple initiatives that, like this, you know, the retreat and talking about things, and trying, feeling like you have the flexibility to try things and you won't be punished. This is actually a great question in medical centers also. There's some literature I left out on healthcare organizations that are resilient, and they talk about errors and tolerance of errors. Learn something from them, change the mindset. What can I learn about this? What can I learn from this? But being able to not punish errors, because then people won't feel comfortable trying. Excellent question. Remember, adaptive leadership and sense-making requires trying things, small experiments, not with a huge impact, but then learn from that. Excellent question. Thank you so much. Any other question or comment?
So, I've seen lots of people approaching resilience post events like we've encountered. But one thing I think would help us as an educational institution to include in our emergency response plan is curricular and pedagogical tactics and strategies in the wake of, or during and in the wake of emergencies. That keeps seeming to be seen, we've got emergency planning, we can get everybody out of the buildings, but how do we remain university in the face of an emergency? And that, I think that's where we've been falling down hard, because that's not in the binders that they pull down in an emergency. And so if we can have that, and that means our faculty leadership is not only giving input into administrative decisions, but are part of the decision processes at all levels, at all times.
Yes.
And because we seem to come in late, and that's how the LMS doesn't get handled until afterwards, and things like that.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful point. So I hope everybody heard at every single level, and then you talked about the process, not necessarily the end goals, but the process, how to get there. We don't have that either at UCSF, I'll say. I'll tell you one thing that one quick strategy that we came up with at UCSF, which we have not implemented yet. I'm meeting with the Vice Chair for Education soon. We said everybody has to include, everybody, we're talking mental health, right, has to include one slide to talk about the impact of climate change. That's what I would like to see my department do. Every speaker, one slide. If you think about it, there's impact all over. It can be a very small thing. You're talking a lot more, broader initiatives, but there can be very small initiatives also. And then I'm happy to come back a year later and tell you if we've actually implemented that by 2020. Any other questions or comments? Great point, thank you. We're good, the students are here. Very good, so maybe we should stop. So we have a few minutes for the students to get stuff. Thank you all for being here and for your attention. Thank you for having me.